be recording this meeting today, so you'll probably see something pop up on your Zoom now. And we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody again to the Coping with Drought workshop this afternoon. I'm really happy to have all of you with us to talk about what we can do to handle the drought that we're in. We've got a great variety of speakers today to address that. I'm just gonna tell you a couple of notes about the Zoom format that we're on today. We're in a group meeting. You'll notice that all the folks in the audience do have their cameras off and are muted. You're welcome to turn your camera on if you're interested in doing so. I know all the presenters like to see the faces of the folks that are out there listening to them. But we'll keep you muted throughout the entire workshop. If you have questions, and we hope that you do, we would love for you to put them in the chat. And please put them in the general chat so that everybody can see. And then we'll address those at the end of the presentations. Please do not chat your question directly to the speaker. It's really important that I see it so I can help moderate the questions at the end. And with that, I will hand it over to Lucas Patzik, the Executive Director of the Napa RCD. He'll be leading us through the workshop this afternoon.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you everybody for joining. I know we've been dealing with many challenges at a very large scale of late, from pandemic to fires and drought. So I know that we're all coming into this maybe feeling a little overwhelmed. And we all know that we all have a role to play in overcoming and adapting to these challenges, but we're not alone in this endeavor. We're a community, and we want to assist our neighbors when things get tough. And I'm being pretty expansive when I'm defining neighbor here. It's people as well as the animals and plants, and we're all suffering from the drought right now. So we're all here together because we're kind of caring about one another's welfare. And really that's the purpose of the workshop today, which is to share about some of the drought relief programs that are available to our community on a voluntary basis. And that's really what we're going to walk through, as well as kind of an overview of the state of the drought, as well as what's been going on with groundwater sustainability planning, with an emphasis on how the ag community itself can get involved. This meeting will be recorded, as Francis mentioned, and we'll make it available on video over YouTube through the Napa RCD's YouTube account. So you can reference it later, share it with friends and colleagues as well. So there's going to be probably a lot of content here. So don't feel freaked out that you need to remember everything. We'll make everything available afterwards. So I'll just quickly introduce the speakers all together, and then we'll get going. It wasn't included in the agenda, so I just want to highlight who will be speaking today. So at first, we'll have Rick Thomaser from Napa County Flood talk about the state of the drought in Napa County. Then we will hear from Shay Richardson from California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Rick Rogers from NOAA NIMFS to talk about the voluntary drought initiative and how ag producers in particular can participate in this program. Then we will hear from Miguel Garcia from Napa RCD and Erica Valek from USDA NRCS to talk about some of the technical and financial assistance programs available to producers dealing with conserving water and enhancing habitat. Then we'll hear from Gigi from the USDA FSA, Farm Services Agency, to talk about the Emergency Conservation Program. Also another drought assistance program through another department of the USDA. And finally, we'll hear from Jameson Crosby with Napa County about the groundwater sustainability plan next steps. And afterwards, we'll do the Q&A. And we'll also try to, wrap up Q&A into some sort of FAQ to make available to the public. Again, trying to make it as easy for you with any sort of note-taking you may be endeavoring through this. So I will hand it off now to Rick Thomaser to kick us off.
I'm going to unmute myself there, and I'm share a screen. Let me know. Does that look good to everyone? Good. Okay, well, good afternoon, and thanks to RCD for inviting me to provide the initial perspective on the status of drought, both locally and regionally. I think perspective is really important because it drives our response to conditions that are affecting us. So my job as the County Public Works Deputy Director for Public Works for Flood Control and Water Resources is sort of at the intersection of too much water and not enough water. And you could really look at it and say the only time we're not in crisis mode is when we have just enough water, which is rare. And that's usually when we're having earthquakes or fires or pandemics or some other calamity. But not to get off topic, let's move on. I just have to figure out how to change my slide. Here we go, page down. Let's try that. There we go. So according to the federal government's perspective, who's affected by drought in Napa County? This is the NOAA drought.gov website, and it looks at drought conditions by county, and this is what it shows for Napa County. So according to the federal government, every single one of us, all 136,484 residents of Napa County are affected by drought. And there's been no change since last week, which is good to know, or last month. And of note, this has been updated through March. So according to their records, March was the 14th driest March on record over the past 128 years. So that's 1894. And we're about 3 1/3 or so inches below what would be normal for the month of March. But maybe more notably is we're actually the driest first quarter of a year, January through March, for the entire 128 years that those records have been kept. So that is very notable that we are in that situation. So kicking off a webinar with a great slide like this is 30 years worth of data for one location in the Napa Valley, and this is monthly precipitation at Napa State Hospital. And that site is, I think, one of the oldest sites in the valley for collecting rainfall data. So it's the one that you commonly hear people cite. When I look at this slide, it sort of reminds me of one of those Facebook quizzes, though, where you have to find a specific number or whatever. So let's all focus on, does anyone see a month where there was zero rainfall during our winter rainy season, which is basically November through April? If you kind of scan the data, you kind of have to look for the 0.00, and it's actually, let me see if my pointer works down here. You're all seeing my pointer. It's February of this year, to the winter season of 21-22. So, and if you really look, that was the only, well, actually we had zero rainfall in 2019-2020 also in March, but you can see how significant that was in terms of how little rainfall we got in February compared to the last 30 years worth of data. So another perspective on drought. But then over in the left-hand or the right-hand side of the slide, you see how the water years are classified: average, wet, dry, very wet. And when you look at 30 years, you see we've had some very wet years. We've had some wet years. We've had average and dry, and now down, more recent years have been these two very dry, 1920 and 2021 are very dry years. But the perspective here is that we're in California and our rainfall is variable. This year, actually, despite that first quarter data showing it was the driest on record, the overall water year is working out to be an average water year, and that's only because of the tremendous amount of rainfall we got in October. that one big storm season, and then a reasonably okay, not great, but okay November and December rainfall. So that sort of saved us. And this next slide will really kind of emphasize that. This is again Napa State Hospital rain gauge in the last 6 years worth of data, and these are cumulative rainfall amounts for the water year from October through September. And you see in the last 6 years, we've had 2 very dry years, 2 wet and very wet years, and this year and 2017, 2018 are shaping up to be about average, just barely average. Dry 2017, 2018 was characterized as a dry year, and that's basically less than 20 inches of precipitation at that location for the whole year. So how does the taking a look at how the Napa River, our major stream that flows through the valley, how has that been affected by those in those last 6 years by those hydrologic conditions? You see the response in a very wet year, the number of times, so water year 2016, 2017 here on the left-hand side of the slide, how many times the river peaked and had very high stream flow in that season. That's when the flood guys' winter vacations are canceled, and we're busy. And then we have dry years and very dry years where flood guys are, not so busy, and water resources guys become busy, guys and gals. So there is a perspective, and there's kind of a look at how our major stream, the Napa River, has behaved during the last, or has responded to the hydrologic conditions during the last 6 years. So this year, coming on the heels of those 2 very dry years, and we thought we were in luck in October when we really got that very, very large storm. We thought, great, the drought is over, or maybe the drought is over, but unfortunately, the faucet basically turned off after that. So we began, there was a lot of concern about water resources around the county, and Board of Supervisors, flood board members asked us to make sure that the public was aware of what's going on with our climate conditions. So we moved our water conservation page button to the very front of the county's homepage. And so if you go to the homepage right in the lower right-hand side, there's a water conservation button. You can click on it, and we are committing to update key hydrologic conditions monthly there. So this is one of our slides that shows now 5 key locations around the county, because you can see the variability of rainfall in the county. Napa State Hospital is kind of at the southern end of and in the valley. It's not one of the wetter areas. You see an area like Mount Veeder. This year, we've actually gotten 41.6 inches of rainfall at Mount Veeder, which is not bad. The average for the year, for the total water year, is 46.5 inches. So you can see how we're doing around the county there. We're also keeping track of water supply reservoir levels. So each of our cities has, except for American Canyon, has a water supply reservoir. Napa actually has 2, and that we're keeping track of in one place how those reservoirs are doing. And that's the bright side of my presentation here, is our local reservoirs are actually close to full. Lake Hennessy is it's 83% there as of May. So that's not too bad, all things considered. Lake Berryessa is at 62%. It's a very, very large reservoir on, Napa County doesn't benefit from most of the water in Lake Berryessa, but the communities immediately around the lake do. And I wanted to end with this picture of, so not all water is obviously from the same source. We don't all, use, the same source of water. And what we have here is two pie charts, and then this table below that breaks down of the water that's actually extracted for use. Water source here, this pie chart. This is the breakdown of where it comes from. So most, in this instance, most water that's used in the county comes from groundwater, and that's 40%, 47% of all water. Then we have recycled water, imported water, and local surface water. So I was kind of looking at it like recycled water, we make it, imported water, we buy it, we store it, or the watershed stores it for us. So that's a way to look at our water bank account. And then this pie chart actually takes that same water, but breaks it down into what do we use the water for. And agriculture and urban residential, are close to equal, but agriculture is our largest water user at 39% of all water, and urban residential about 28%, commercial industrial 15. Recreational is things like watering golf courses and parks. And rural residential it's mostly groundwater use, but that's 13% of our water use. The table below, and this slide is also available on that county website under water conservation page. So if you want to take a closer look at it when you have more time, but it just is a matrix of that water source and water use. So you can actually say, for example, of the 47% of water, which is groundwater, agriculture uses 71% of that water, and urban residential, uses 2% of that water, and rural residential uses 27%. So all of those, then each of those sources adds to 100. So I hope that provided just a start for us here in terms of where we're at in Napa County, and regionally. I will say just a couple other things. Our imported water is water we get from the State Water Project, and that's something that my department administers. The water that it's basically water coming from Lake Oroville down the Sacramento River. So again, that provides 28% of our water, but it's pretty much for cities. And the our ag community and rural residents are pretty much on groundwater. Recycled water is really important. It's becoming more important, and we have two pretty good size areas, plus each of the cities supplies some amount of recycled water. And if you're interested in recycled water and you're living in the MST area, you can reach out to me. And I can also connect you if you're in the Carneros area there's a large recycled water project in that area as well. But that's it for my presentation, and I will stop sharing there. Yeah, Lucas, did we want to go on to the next presentation or what?
I can share my screen and start. Let's see here. Do you guys see this?
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I was forced on mute.
Oh, yeah.
So Shay, yeah, please take it away.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Let me just get my face out of here. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Shay Richardson. I am the Drought Water Rates Coordinator for California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Region 3, which encompasses Napa County. I want to say thank you to Lucas and the Napa RCD for inviting us to discuss the 2022 Voluntary Drought Initiative Program today. And so I'm going to kick off the presentation, and then Rick Rogers, he's the in-stream flow coordinator with NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service, he'll close it out. So quick overview of our presentation. So first I'm going to discuss the current drought conditions in Napa County. I know Rick obviously just provided a presentation, but I'll just touch on it briefly. The drought's impact to summer rearing salmon and steelhead, tributaries of concern in the Napa River watershed, and then Rick Rogers will provide an overview of the Voluntary Drought Initiative, or VDI program. We'll discuss incentives for participating in the program. We'll look at past VDI agreements and the results of the 2014 VDI program, provide our vision of the VDI program as a success, and then we'll let you all know how to participate and how to get in touch with us. So, okay, so here, yeah, so I know Rick just discussed this, but so Napa County, like many coastal regions, has a Mediterranean style climate, which means summers are dry and the majority of rainfall occurs during the winter season. And so while seasonality is consistent, the amount of rainfall is variable. So we occasionally experience dry years or periods of drought. And so water demand in the region is also much higher during dry summer months, which exacerbates these conditions, and it really takes a toll on our watersheds. So Napa County, it's currently experiencing its driest year on record, spanning the past century. Rainfall is 15 inches below normal, and the entire county is currently in a state of severe drought, verging on extreme, which indicates that water supply will not satisfy demand for all of agriculture, wildlife, and urban needs. And then, so to explore this graph here, it's by US Drought Monitor. It uses precipitation or lack thereof to categorize dry conditions by severity. And it shows that drought conditions in 2021 and 2022 are strikingly similar to what the region experienced in 2014 through 2016. But perhaps even worse, or just, drier conditions. Okay, so it's not an easy time to be a fish in our watersheds. And some stream systems reaches have already become dry this early in the year. And summer stream flow conditions are likely to be very stressful to oversummering juvenile salmon and steelhead. So juvenile salmon and steelhead rear in small freshwater streams before they migrate to the ocean to mature into adults. So when stream flow becomes disconnected in a stream system, the juvenile fish become trapped in isolated drying pools, which ultimately results in mortality, as you can see in this image here on the left. So sustaining even just a trickle of stream flow through these pools provides enough food and maintains survivable temperature and oxygen levels to keep juvenile salmon alive until winter rains return, and they can then migrate to the ocean. Okay, so rearing streams in the Napa River watershed that have the highest likelihood of stream flow disconnection this summer, York Creek, Sulphur Creek, Dry Creek, and Redwood Creek. This is due to surface and groundwater diversions, as well as the physical characteristics of these streams. And these are the sub-watersheds in the Napa River that the Voluntary Drought Initiative Program is most interested in pursuing water conservation and flow enhancing projects in. However, the program isn't limited to only these tributaries. And so anyway, on that note, I'm going to pass the mic to Rick Rogers, and he'll provide an overview of the VDI program.
Great, thank you, Shay. And good afternoon, everyone. As Shay mentioned earlier, my name is Rick Rogers. I am the in-stream flow coordinator for NOAA Fisheries for our California Coastal Office. So that office deals with, Mexican, Oregon, everything that flows out to the Pacific Ocean outside of the Central Valley. So today I'm going to be giving just kind of a brief overview on our voluntary drought initiative program. This was developed earlier this year. It's our second go around with a VDI program. And really what it is, just to boil it down, it's a declaration by CDF&W and NOAA Fisheries that we want to work with private landowners and water users to help implement projects that are going to minimize the impacts of drought on salmon and steelhead that are listed under both the federal and the state Endangered Species Act. And the types of projects that we are that are going to be covered under this VDI and that we're reaching out to landowners to help implement are targeted flow augmentation, water storage and or forbearance. We have monitoring of both fish populations or flow with respect to drought impacts. We have the release of rescued fish. If you were a landowner that, let's say, had a stream on your property that has perennial flow throughout the summer and is likely to have good flow conditions for this summer, we'd be interested in maybe working with you and relocating some fish from drying creeks into your stream channel. And then the last project type is a new one. I mentioned earlier that this is a second go around for this program. We had the original VDI back during the 2014 through 16 drought period. But we added a new project this go round, and it is winter floodplain inundation and groundwater recharge. So next slide, Shay. So, what are we likely to get out of this program, and why are we reaching out to you and spending, this effort? And really, this is, as you, I'm sure, guessed, is meant to keep fish alive during this summer. We are really fearful that this summer, following the past 2 very dry years that we've just gone through, this year is looking to be another extremely dry summer. And so, that this whole program is really intended just to ensure that we have enough flow within our creeks so that we can avoid mass fish die-offs. And one of the avenues and benefits of this program that we can offer is that there is actually funding available for implementing these types of projects. CDF&W has been granted a sizable chunk of funds to help implement drought type projects that mitigate and minimize drought impacts on natural resources. So that is a kind of a switch from, I don't believe that we had that same type of funding back during our first go around with the VDIs, but definitely it is an option and available this go around. Also, CDF&W and NIMS, as well as the State Water Board, we are willing and able and ready to assist with project design, project development, even, to the extent we can, project implementation. And so, that's something that is going to vary by different project types and different landowners, but we are there as a resource. And this is going to improve ecosystem function on the landowner's property. So not only keeping fish alive, but it's also going to provide an overall environmental benefit. And the next couple of bullet points on here kind of get to the question of what's in it for the local, participants. And one would be, by improving the environmental conditions on your property, some landowners, especially if they're in a business, they like to highlight how green their business is, how they take care of their land, how they're taking care of the environment. So this is definitely a program that I think can be used to that goal. And also, this last point is pretty important in that, when we think about trying to protect ESA listed fish and other aquatic organisms, and the different ways of having that protection be realized, we have either the regulatory route, which when I say that, I'm talking about things such as the State Water Board coming in with restrictions or curtailments, or there are these cooperative, public-private type opportunities that can come in and hopefully achieve that goal without having to go through the regulatory process. And that's where the State Water Board, with these VDIs, if we can get an effective group of projects within a watershed to where they are achieving the goals of protecting aquatic resources, the State Water Board has said that they will actually they will consider that as a mitigating factor as far as whether they need to come in and use a regulatory approach. So that's a very important point. Next slide, Shay. So this next couple of slides are just going to be a really kind of quick overview of some of the history of EDIs, and that's back in that 2014 to 2016 period. So next slide. So back in 2014, we worked with the Jackson family wines in Green Valley Creek. Green Valley Creek is a very important coho salmon watershed that is in the lower Russian River. And they had a property that was up against Green Valley Creek. And on it, they had a small pond. I think it was no more than 8 or 10 acre feet of water. But we were able to actually release water through piping from that pond down into the creek channel, and with the intent of, like Shay said, trying to keep those pools connected by a wetted riffle, the shallow area between the pools. So as you can see in these pictures here, before and after the water releases, we did actually achieve a nice connection for the rest of the summer. And it did keep the fish that were residing in those pools alive during the rest of the summer. Next slide, Shay. Another example, this is also in the lower Russian River on Dutchville Creek. Camp Meeker is like a local group a property where they actually have a bunch of different things going on their property, but they have some agriculture. And what we have done with them is we put in a huge storage tank that during the winter, they're able to actually pump water from the creek when water is available and there's more than we know what to do with during high flow events, and they pump that water into the tank. And then what they do is they release that water during the summer to maintain this connection between pools. And it, like the Bones Road project, has been very successful in keeping juvenile coho salmon alive when it's been implemented. And it's actually been implemented every year since that time. It's not just it's transitioned from a VDI project to more of a every year project. But another example of success for the VDI program. Next slide, Shay. And the last one I'll talk about is just E&J Gallo Winery on Porter Creek. This is a tributary to the lower Russian River that's right below Dry Creek, kind of near Healdsburg. And this was another project where there was an off-channel pond, pretty sizable off-channel pond, but the Gallo people were able to pipe water down from that off-channel pond and release it into Porter Creek. And this project was kind of unique in that there was a UC Berkeley dissertation, a PhD student that was actually doing research on this project. So we were able to get some really solid monitoring and data as far as what was happening within the creek and within the habitat after these flow releases. And we saw really improved dissolved oxygen levels, which those DO levels are kind of the real critical component for summer survival. Usually when you lose that disconnection between the pools, the water stagnates, the dissolved oxygen crashes, and the fish end up dying very quickly. So next slide. So really quickly, I think I'm running up against my time, but a vision of success. Number one, we would like to get a large participation rate. We will work with anybody. I know that Shay earlier highlighted some of the watersheds that are high priority. If you're within any watersheds, we will work with you if you can benefit salmon and steelhead. Collaborative efforts, we're going to help you pursue grant funds and implement the projects. And again, finally, just maintaining that pool connectivity is what we're shooting for. Next slide. And if you're interested, we would love to speak with you about opportunities on your property. So there are a couple of email addresses that you can email Shay or I at. And there's also a couple of web pages that you can find more information on this program at. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Shay. So now we're going to move on to a couple USDA and RCD technical and financial assistance programs. So we'll start with Miguel with Napa RCD.
Can you guys see my slides just fine?
Yep, we can see it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about a program that the Napa RCD has been running to assist farmers on assessing the performance of their irrigation systems.
You're good. Okay.
So this is unfortunately a very common picture that we have seen in our region in particularly past year. The ongoing drought in California has hit agriculture quite heavily. And unfortunately, the wine industry, it's not an exception. Last year, I had the opportunity to chat with a lot of farmers. Some of them simply didn't have enough water to be able to give the plants what they needed to provide a valuable crop. So a lot of folks had to drop their grapes or just simply to deal with poor quality. So in order to deal with low water availability, it's very important for farmers to implement efficient irrigation water management plans. And typically we incentivize farmers to utilize technology such as soil moisture probes, pressure bomb to measure water stress, or figure out through the use of evapotranspiration measurements how much water the plants are using. And we like them to utilize all of these technologies to develop a management plan that can help them use their water more efficiently. However, a water management plan is just as good as how the system is performing. So if your irrigation system is not performing properly, it is not going to matter as much how well you try to manage the water. If your irrigation system is not providing the amount of water that you think, meaning if you open your irrigation for 3 hours, 4 hours, and you're expecting a certain amount of water to be discharged during that time, and that's not what is happening, then it doesn't really matter how well you manage it. So that's where we, the city has come in and tried to assist farmers in assessing the performance of irrigation systems to determine how well they're performing and be able to give farmers recommendations and advice on how to improve the irrigation system so that later on they can move on into more management once the system is performing properly. The way that we do this is in terms of what we call distribution uniformity. So basically, if you look at a field, if there are areas in which the soil is receiving more water than others because the emitters or the irrigation system is delivering more or less water than expected, you're going to have zones where the soil is receiving more water. You're going to have zones where the soil receives less water. And this creates uneven conditions. So when farmers are implementing nutrient management strategies, sometimes a lot of the times they introduce it to the irrigation line. So if this section is receiving more water, it's also going to receive more nutrients. So it's very important to assess the performance of irrigation system and determine its distribution uniformity in order to determine how well your system is performing and implement any changes necessary to make sure that you are addressing these kind of issues. This is one example. The other example here will be cases in which there will be plants that are receiving less water than they need. So in that case, not only are they receiving also less nutrients through irrigation, but they're also not receiving the amount of water that they need. So oftentimes I receive phone calls from farmers wondering why there's uneven growth in the vineyards. And in some cases, it's because of unevenness in the distribution uniformity of the water. So if you're having issues with areas that are either too vigorous or not growing properly, it could be that your irrigation system is not performing properly. So it's important that you get your system assessed. So we provide that service. If anybody's interested, I'm going to put in my contact information at the end of the slides. We've been providing this service for a while, and we have been fortunate to have enough funding to provide it at no cost to you. This is an example of what we see when we are in the field. So first of all, when we do these evaluations, we're looking at the water discharge from the emitters. We're also looking at pressures throughout the irrigation lines because that affects how the emitters perform. And then we provide a score based on the distribution uniformity. So the score is a scale that we use is a percentile scale, where 92 to 100% is considered excellent, 87 to 83 is okay, and anything below 75% is considered poor. And I'll give you a quick example here on what the impact of improving your irrigation system could be. So this actually represents a very typical scenario. So if we assume that this irrigation system receive a score of 75% or less with about 20% over discharge, meaning the emitters are discharging 20% more than they're supposed to. So if they have a 1 gallon per hour emitter installed, this would be actually discharging 1.2. And I'll show you how this represents a quite large amount of water. So if we assume, this is just an example, we assume a 6x4 spacing, we're looking at about 1,800 vines. So if we assume that each of one of those vines has a 1 gallon per hour emitter with this deficiency of over discharge, and we assume that that person irrigated for 3 hours. Well, in those 3 hours, each of those vines is receiving about 0.6 gallons extra water. And this is water that the irrigator or the manager does not expect, because when they turn in the irrigation for 3 hours, they expect that it's going to be 3 gallons, when in reality it's 3.6. So if we do the math here and we just look at one planted acre, and we're looking at about 1,800 vines with 0.6 gallons in excess, we're looking at about 1,000 gallons of additional water that is being added. That is one single irrigation event. Now, we assume that there's 30 irrigation events in one season. This number may vary depending on where you're farming. We're looking at over 32,000 gallons of excess water in one single acre. Now, this excess water contributes to groundwater recharge. And in some cases, that's favorable. However, because this water is coming from an agricultural operation, it is going to carry nutrients with it, particularly nitrate, and it can also carry agrochemicals with it. So we may not want particularly that water to go into the aquifer. So this is just one example of what 1 acre would be. You can do the math. If a whole vineyard, 40 acres, 50 acres, has the same problem of 20% excess discharge, this amounts to a lot of water. So this would be now a scenario in which the entire field is receiving exactly or similar amount of water, meaning that we can see that it's very even. So in this case, if we went and do the assessment, figure out what is wrong, the vineyard manager implemented our recommendations, and now we can be certain that the entire field is receiving the same amount of water, then we can move into irrigation management and irrigation efficiency. So once your irrigation system is working properly, then you can use technology, so moisture probes, pressure bomb, or any other sort of technology that you can use to track down your water usage, and then make changes to that scheduling to make sure that you are applying the right amount of water when and at the right amount. So in this case, this dotted line here represents the root zone. So in this top layer right here, which for vines can be several feet down, depending on the rootstock and the age of your vines, this is where you want the water. Anything below that would be excess. So the ideal scenario would be for you to irrigate right at the root zone. And there's no way for you to really know if you're irrigating at the root zone level or if you're over irrigating below the root zone level, unless you have sensors. You have soil moisture probes down at the root zone where you could monitor what the water change happens every time you irrigate. So it is very important to make sure your irrigation system functions properly before you even try to make any changes to your scheduling. Once your irrigation system is performing properly, then you can move on and then try to make changes to your scheduling. So we have been providing this service since 2014. We have done over 129 of these assessments. And out of all these 120, the average DU, the distribution performance score, is 76%. And this is considered poor. So as a county, out of these evaluations that we've done, we're scoring quite low. So that means that there's a lot of room for improvement. And some of the most typical things that we see out there that cause low distribution uniformity is excessive clogging due to poor water quality. So ensuring that you have proper filtration, making sure that you do regular maintenance, meaning walking around, making sure that there's no leaks, making sure that your meters are working properly, make sure that you are flushing your lines, particularly after any injections of fertilizers or any sort of other amendments. You want to make sure that you flush your lines definitely before the beginning of the season. It's very important. With those simple changes or those simple strategies, you can make sure that your irrigation system is functioning properly. The second most common reason that causes low distribution uniformity is when we encounter pressures within the irrigation lines, not at the manifold, within the irrigation lines, that is outside of what is recommended for the emitters that are installed. The great majority of farmers here in Napa use the NetFM woodpeckers. Those are pressure compensating emitters that are supposed to work regardless of pressure fluctuations. However, it has a limit. If your pressures within the lines drops below 10 psi or is greater than 50 psi, the emitter cannot function properly. So ensuring that your pressure within your lines is within 10 and 50 psi makes a huge difference. And then just a little tangent here, but very important, is making sure that you enhance and maintain proper soil health. A healthy soil would allow you to infiltrate and retain water more efficiently. And this is particularly important in times with low rain, because you want to make sure that you infiltrate and retain as much of the water that is coming in. But it's also very important in events of very high rain events, such as we observed in October, because you also want to make sure that these heavy rain events are not causing erosion and that this water is infiltrating and being retained. And one way to do that is to ensure that you increase your soil organic matter pool. And this is just one estimate that the USDA usually gives out. Every soil is different, but this is sort of like the numbers that we go. If you were to increase 1% of your soil organic matter, you could increase about 25,000 gallons of available water per acre. This represents about 1 inch of rain. And this is additional water that your soil wasn't able to hold before because you didn't have proper organic matter levels. So ensuring that you maintain proper soil health can be your best ally in years where there's not enough rain. And then very briefly, Erica after me is going to talk a little bit about the USDA programs, but the California Department of Food and Agriculture has two very important programs available, the Healthy Soils Program and the State Water Efficiency or SWEEP program that particularly the SWEEP program would help farmers pay for any of the things that we recommend you change. So you need to change emitters, lines, introduce soil moisture probes, all of the things that we would recommend in our report after we do the evaluation in your irrigation system could be added into an application for the SWEEP program. And this year, the Napa RCD has funding to provide assistance for applications for both the Healthy Soils program and the SWEEP program. So if you're interested, please reach out, we're here to help. This is my contact information. If anybody is interested on getting your irrigation system assessed this season, just give me a call. We have plenty of availability and we have plenty of funding for this year so that we can provide it at no cost. Thank you.
Miguel, and I will hand it off to Erica Valek with NRCS.
Great. Hi, everyone. I think that is showing the presentation. Okay, well, thank you so much, Miguel, for that brief introduction.
And Erica, it's not showing, by the way.
Oh, is it not? Oh, okay. Hold on. Okay, how's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
I apologize. We just practiced this. Oh, thank you so much, Miguel, for that introduction. So we're going to talk about a little today about the financial assistance programs through your local USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service office that is right here in Napa. We have an office with the RCD. So I'm going to outline some of the financial assistance programs that we offer to see if you're interested in applying, and also considering that we're available just to provide technical assistance, and we have a lot of resources here that we can guide you to. So keeping in mind that we do have these financial assistance programs, but we're also available for just general advice and a site visit. So there are two main financial assistance programs through NRCS. The first is known as the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. This is seen as our really main program that addresses environmental concerns so that we can improve your agriculture operation and establish very basic conservation agriculture infrastructure. Our second program is known as the Conservation Stewardship Program, and this is really seen as a way to enhance your operation and build on your existing conservation plan and on the existing conservation practices that you may have established through EQIP or through some other options. So when we look at these two programs, when we come out and make a site visit to your property, we're really beginning by looking at the environmental concerns that we see on the property. So the first category that this workshop is focusing on and that we focus on as well as water. So inefficient irrigation water use and also surface water depletion. Another category that we look at is plant productivity and health. How are your vines doing? How are the trees doing in your forest? Plant pest pressure is looking at invasive species on the site or any other pests that may be targeting your crop. Another category is wildfire hazard from biomass accumulation. So this is mostly looking at forestry or the forest as well. Finally, there's soil, the organic matter depletion, looking at some soil test results, sheet and rill erosion. And then very lastly, if you have livestock on the property, inadequate livestock water quantity, quality, and distribution. So with those in mind, we're focusing mainly on water and animals and getting water as effectively to those two categories as possible. So when you put in an application with NRCS and you have a crop that you're looking at maybe improving your irrigation water efficiency, what we first recommend and what we can include in your application is an irrigation evaluation. As Miguel mentioned, an irrigation evaluation assesses the performance of your irrigation system, and this can be done through the Napa RCD, like Miguel mentioned, for no cost right now. So that's the main avenue that we recommend that you get an irrigation evaluation done with, where you can also include it in your NRCS application. So it looks at volume, pressure, distribution, uniformity, and we can use these results to determine to replace irrigation system or components, and then overall develop an irrigation water management plan for your property and what you are irrigating. So based on that irrigation evaluation, there are multiple practices that we could include in your NRCS application. And these would address inefficient irrigation water use if that is what the irrigation evaluation deemed you needed. So some things to keep in mind is if you don't have a flow meter or perhaps it's not functioning properly, that's something that we can put in your application to help you financially acquire. We can also help with soil moisture sensors and data loggers so that you're able to put those throughout your cropped area to look at the soil moisture. We also provide or can include an incentive to monitor your irrigation water management. And so this would be monitoring the soil moisture content as well as your irrigation to see if you're irrigating enough or not enough, or if maybe you're over irrigating. So making sure you're in that fine line. And then also we can help and include in your NRCS application micro irrigation, drip tube replacement if perhaps yours is outdated or it's in dire need of replacement. So these are all practices that we can use to address this environmental concern. Another one of the environmental concerns I mentioned before was surface water depletion. And so we can assist on water storage for irrigation water to address surface water depletion. This really needs to first be shown to us through the water rights, that showing that you can store water. It needs to show in the water rights the amount of allowed storage, when you can pump, and how long you can store the water for. We can together develop a water budget for your irrigated cropland. And in the end, this plan must be the least cost alternative to the government. And of course, we have to consider when planning this, that we need time to get the permitting and work together to make sure we have all of the required documentation. Finally, the last resource concern we're going to focus on today is inadequate livestock water. And so this is focusing on if you have livestock on your property and you have a grazing history, we can assist you in applying for stock water troughs to place throughout your property so that animals have access to water throughout the property and they're not concentrated in one area. We can also assist with above ground water storage facilities that then provide water to the stock troughs, pipeline from these spring developments if you have springs on your property, wells, and this is for livestock only, so to get water to those troughs, as I mentioned before, And then cross fencing and prescribed grazing to encourage a prescribed grazing system that rotates animals throughout the property. So if you're interested in applying for applying with NRCS programs, there is a little bit of a timeline that you need to follow and different things that you need to keep in mind. So firstly is that we accept applications on a rolling basis. We do have deadlines throughout the year, but they are announced every year and they change every year. So right now we do not have an application deadline and we are accepting applications on a rolling basis until that deadline is announced. If you are interested in applying, you can call one of us and we'll develop a conservation plan to address these environmental concerns and also meet your objectives. And this is done through making a site visit and really walking your property with you. After you have your application in and they announce the deadline, we also have an internal NRCS ranking deadline. Your application is placed in multiple ranking pools that you meet the requirements for. And then you are ranked among other applicants based on how many environmental concerns you're addressing and the diversity of practices that you are including in the application. Our funding selections usually occur between March and August of every year. And if your application is funded, it becomes a contract and it goes through a biological and archaeological review. So these reviews can often take several months. So from the time that your application becomes a contract, you may not be able to begin the practices for a few months after you receive funding. We usually plan the practices in your contract over 3 years. So that is to space out the work that we have planned in the contract and make sure that not everything is pushed into 1 year. And then our requirements are that the implemented practices are completed to NRCS standards and specifications. We provide a flat rate of compensation regardless of labor and other material costs. And so this flat rate is what would be paid to in the very end. And so finally, there are some eligibility requirements with this whole timeline and the application process. The first is that if we are planning irrigation water management practices that I mentioned before, it is a requirement that NRCS get your irrigation history and the land has to have been irrigated for 2 of the last 5 years. So some sort of proof of that. If you're looking to divert water for storage, we do need the riparian water rights. And if you're looking at applying for prescribed grazing or stock water troughs for livestock, like I mentioned before, we will need the grazing history as well. As far as land eligibility, the applicant must show land control. This can be through a lease or through the individual or entity that owns the property on the deed. So our applicant eligibility is several forms to document the LLC or trust members, and then who has signature authority if it is an entity. And then another big eligibility is that the average adjusted gross income over the past 3 taxable years has to be less than $900,000. And so that's an average over the past 3 taxable years. And then finally, like I mentioned before, we do pay a flat rate, and this is regardless of how much the final practice will cost. And yes, so a flat rate. And so we do not require receipts, and we just require that the practice is completed to our standards and specifications. So this is what our office looks like in Napa. And the district conservationist, Evelyn Denzine, is also on this call today, this workshop. And so we're happy to answer your questions at the very end, or email us or call us after the workshop. And we'd be happy to make a field visit to your property or answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Erica. And now we will hear about the Emergency Conservation Program from FSA. I believe, Francis, you're going to pull up that presentation.
Thank you, RCD, for inviting FSA to talk about the ECP drought, the Emergency Conservation Program for drought. Next. My name is Gisela Moreno-Gover. I'm with the Farm Service Agency, and I'm the County Executive Director for representing the Solano and Napa counties. Next. Okay, farmers and ranchers experiencing severe drought conditions may be eligible for cost share assistance under the ECP drought. This disaster program is administered by the Department of Ag, the Farm Service Agency, which provides cost share assistance if the damage is so severe that the water available for livestock or orchards and vineyards have been released below normal to the extent that neither can survive without additional water. A producer qualifying for ECP drought assistance may receive cost share assistance not to exceed 75% of the producer's total allowable cost to perform the practice. The limit is $500,000 per person or legal entity. Approved practices and measures may include the following: installing pipelines or other facilities for livestock water or existing irrigation systems for orchards and vineyards, constructing and deepening wells for livestock water, and developing springs and seeps for livestock water. Only those farms or ranches that had adequate livestock watering systems or facilities or adequate irrigation systems for the orchards and vineyards before the drought are eligible for the cost share assistance. To be eligible for cost share, practices must be not started until request has been first filed at the FSA office and an on-site inspection of the problem area has been made by an FSA representative. A producer is not eligible to earn ECP assistance to rehabilitate any land on which the producer is required to maintain the practice or the land is enrolled by any other federal or state cost share program. Participants have or will receive funding on the same acreage under, and it's CRP, which is the Conservation Reserve Program, EFRP, which is the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, EQIP, Environmental Equality Incentive Program, EWP is the Emergency Watershed Program, TAP is the Tree Assistant Program, and WRP is Wetlands Reserve Program. Some of the practices that are not authorized, and I'll just go through a few that some have been calling. The first one is water hauling, repairing and deepening ponds, livestock water facility to provide water on land in which the cover will be used for hay, silage, field chopped and hauled to headquarters for feeding, wells that do not produce sufficient water, and pumps or motors not permanently installed in wells. Some of the practices that are authorized, and these are just some that I'm going to go over, are storage facility, including tanks incorporated into a new or existing water distribution system and troughs above ground if needed to supply water for immediate livestock, constructing and deepening wells for livestock water, constructing tailwater recovery pits for any irrigation system to orchards and vineyards, measures to provide emergency water for livestock and confinement operations on the farm that were in confinement before the drought, and solar panels to provide power to pump water for livestock, and the solar panels are the best costly alternative. We are currently accepting applications for this sign up. It started April 15th until June 14th. You can contact our office. Our phone number is listed, 707-448-0106, extension 2, or you can just simply email us and we can schedule an appointment. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Gigi. And now we're going to have one more presentation by Jameson Crosby about the GSP, and then we will take Q&A from folks.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can y'all see my screen okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, I wanted to just give you a quick update on the implementation of the GSP. I gave this update at our WIC meeting just a couple weeks ago, but I do have a little bit of new information. So probably some of you followed this process as it was going along. It was pretty long effort, about 18 months to write the groundwater sustainability plan, starting, I think it was June of 2020. We had a 25-member groundwater sustainability plan advisory committee, a mixture of different stakeholder groups in the Valley that participated in the drafting of the plan. And we were very pleased to submit it to Department of Water Resources at the end of January of this year. It was over 1,000 pages, and that did not even include any of the appendices. But don't let that daunt you. If you have an interest in familiarizing yourself with the plan or reading the plan, we do have executive summaries, both in English and Spanish. They're posted to our website. So I would invite you to take a look at it if you care to do so. DWR was going to have a 60-day public comment period on the document, but they have extended that to be a 2-year public comment period, which coincides actually with their public comment period. They have 2 years in which to review the document, and given its length, that makes sense to me. It's not going to be a quick effort. So the public comment period will be open that entire time. And of course, it was also open during the development of the plan itself, and we took comments as we went along. So that is the link to where you can find the plan. If you don't care to jot that down so quickly, just go to countyofnapa.org and type in groundwater into the search field, and it'll be the first result that pops up. It's right on our homepage. So as I mentioned, we had one of the first things that that the Groundwater Sustainability Agency empowered us to do post-plan was to convene a technical advisory group. And it is envisioned as a 3 to 7 member committee. Not sure yet. I'm very close to making a final decision. But the purpose of the technical advisory group would really be to analyze the data that are collected at our monitoring sites, review 4 work plans that I'll talk about in a slide or two, but we have 4 work plans that we're developing this year, so they will be involved in the review of those plans. And I think of the third bullet as kind of one of the most important functions, is to help us assess if and when any of our GSP triggers and thresholds are exceeded. And then even more importantly, what are we going to do about it if that happens? So they'll help us work out what are appropriate projects and management actions if we do have exceedances. So to continue on with the tag, the process for convening a tag was we published a request for qualifications on March 7th and asked people who were qualified in a number of different disciplines, hydrogeology, viticulture, and the like, a number of different disciplines, to submit their application. We had 12 applicants. We interviewed all of them in the mid and latter part of April, and we have provisionally selected 3 candidates who we will present to the GSA for their approval on May 17th. And we expect to convene the first meeting of the tag in July. I mentioned there were 4 work plans that we are working on with our technical consultant, Ludor Scalmanini Consulting Engineers. The first is a stormwater resource plan. This is a plan that is, well, we need it to, if we're going to get any kind of grant funding from the state for agricultural managed aquifer recharge or any other kinds of groundwater recharge projects or stormwater infiltration projects, we need a stormwater resource plan to even qualify. So we're working on that. We're also working on a plan for groundwater pumping reduction. Our advisory committee acknowledged in their meetings toward the end of the plan development that a 10% pumping reduction would be necessary to reduce the impacts on interconnected surface waters and groundwater dependent ecosystems. And the best way to do that is through increased water conservation. Primarily in the vineyards, but not exclusively in the vineyards, because of course they're not the only ones who are using our groundwater. And it'll include operational logistical details on how to implement, measure, track, and report those pumping reductions. Third, we're going to work on a vineyard conservation plan. It ties into the pumping reduction plan, as I mentioned. We want to acknowledge that many, if not all, vineyards have probably already taken some pretty significant steps to conserve water, but it's a holy grail we'll never totally achieve. We'll never get to the end of the rainbow. We can always do more. So we're trying to explore our options in a really large scale way of how to foster vineyard water conservation. And lastly, we're going to do a work plan exploring some and trying to fill some of the data gaps in our understanding of groundwater dependent ecosystems and surface water interconnection. And other activities that we're going to work on this year, we have 4 monitoring wells that we plan to install. They will be dual completion monitoring wells, which means they'll be right beside each other, but drilled to different depths in the aquifer. You can see the locations there around the valley and various locations. We're hoping to get them done in the fall, but we've hit some snafus in terms of getting the permissions necessary to drill them from the property owners, but we're working really hard on that. So cross your fingers, hopefully that will be done in the next month or 2. And we'll continue ongoing monitoring of our existing wells. And then finally, we are working with the growers. We've had a couple meetings, again, on these topics of vineyard conservation generally, but also trying to induce some of the growers who use evapotranspiration stations in their vineyards to measure water consumption. We're hopefully going to get some data from them. Some of them have indicated they're willing to share that data with the county, and that would help us quantify water use and improve our estimates and our modeling for the basin overall. So that was a brief presentation, but that's what I've got for you.
Thank you, Jameson. Thank you all to all the speakers this afternoon. I don't see any questions so far in the chat for any of the speakers. However, we can take questions now. So please, if you're interested in posing a question, you can either enter it into the chat or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can pose that directly.